Carissimi fratelli e sorelle, con profondo dolore devo annunciare la morte del nostro Santo Padre Francesco. Alle ore 7:35 di questa mattina, il Vescovo di Roma Francesco è tornato alla casa del Padre. La sua vita tutta intera è stata dedicata al servizio del Signore e della sua Chiesa. Ci ha insegnato a vivere i valori del Vangelo con fedeltà, coraggio e amore universale, in modo particolare a favore dei più poveri ed emarginati.
Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88 on Easter Monday, following a prolonged illness. His death marks the end of a transformative papacy, one that began in 2013 and introduced a shift in tone and priorities for the Catholic Church. According to the Vatican, the Pope died peacefully at 7:35 a.m., and preparations for his funeral rites are underway. His body will lie in state at St. Peter's Basilica before being interred at the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, diverging from the traditional papal burial place. A conclave to elect his successor will begin in no fewer than 15 days, in accordance with Vatican protocol. Just a day before his death, Pope Francis made a final public appearance. He addressed the faithful who had gathered at St. Peter's Square for the Easter Sunday celebrations, offering his Urbi et Orbi blessing. Though visibly frail and no longer able to preside over the Mass himself, he delegated those duties to Cardinal Angelo Camastri. However, the Pope still appeared on the balcony of the Basilica, where he spent nearly an hour greeting the crowd, offering blessings, and riding in his Pope mobile through the square to the cheers of those present. This surprising gesture was met with excitement and warmth from thousands in attendance. During his final journey to the Basilica on Sunday, the Pope briefly met with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who was visiting Rome with his family. The Vatican described the encounter as short and cordial. While details remain limited, it is known that their relationship had been strained in the past, particularly over Francis's vocal opposition to the Trump administration's immigration policies. The Pope had been outspoken in advocating for the humane treatment of migrants, which had clashed with the hardline stance supported by Vance and others. Despite past tensions, the meeting seemed to be an effort at diplomacy, even if only symbolic. Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, became the first pontiff from outside Europe in over a millennium when he was elected in 2013. His election followed the surprising resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, the first such resignation in centuries. Bergoglio's rise to the papacy was the culmination of a life deeply rooted in faith and service. Before entering the priesthood, he had worked as a nightclub bouncer and trained as a chemical technician. His religious calling came after being inspired by a priest, leading him to join the Jesuit order and eventually become a Jesuit priest at 32. He would later serve as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, where he gained a reputation for humility and compassion, often working closely with impoverished communities. Known as the Slum Bishop, Bergoglio focused on social justice, poverty alleviation, and spiritual guidance for marginalized groups. His appointment as a cardinal by Pope John Paul II in 2001 further amplified his influence within the Church. By the time he was chosen to lead the global Catholic community, he had established himself as a figure of both pastoral care and political courage. His papacy would reflect this duality, deeply spiritual yet not afraid to confront political and social issues head-on. Francis's papacy stood out for its more progressive tone. He took a notably softer approach to controversial issues like divorce, same-sex relationships, and the environment. Though he upheld many traditional church doctrines, he often emphasized mercy, inclusion, and dialogue over dogma. For example, under certain conditions, he allowed priests to bless same-sex couples, a decision that was both lauded and criticized within the Church. He also addressed transgender individuals with compassion, stating they could receive baptism as long as it did not cause scandal within the congregation. On environmental issues, he made global headlines by issuing the encyclical Laudato Si, calling for urgent action on climate change. He positioned environmental stewardship as a moral obligation, aligning spiritual concerns with scientific advocacy. His frequent remarks about the moral failures of consumerism and disregard for the planet made him a prominent figure in the global environmental conversation. Despite his liberal tone on several issues, Pope Francis maintained a firm stance on abortion. In a document released by the Vatican last year, he condemned abortion as a severe moral crisis. While his papacy often highlighted the need for compassion and understanding, on this issue he remained steadfastly conservative, reinforcing the Church's traditional teaching. In terms of health, Francis faced numerous challenges over the years. He had part of one lung removed in his early 20s due to pleurisy, and this weakened respiratory capacity would trouble him throughout his life. In 2023, he was hospitalized with bronchitis and underwent surgery for an abdominal hernia. More recently, in late 2024 and early 2025, he experienced several falls that left him visibly injured, including a bruised chin and an arm in a sling. Despite these setbacks, he remained remarkably active until shortly before his death. In fact, just last September, he embarked on a demanding 12-day tour of Southeast Asia and Oceania, visiting Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, and Singapore. In each location, he met with large crowds, participated in Mass, and spoke out on various global and spiritual matters. During his final overseas trip, the Pope continued to blend spiritual themes with political commentary. In Singapore, he issued sharp criticism of both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, characterizing one as a figure who discards migrants and the other as someone who supports abortion. These comments reflected his continued willingness to engage directly with global political debates, often in a way that unsettled traditional expectations for papal neutrality. His criticism of American politics was not limited to campaign rhetoric. In early 2025, following Trump's re-election and the subsequent implementation of mass deportation policies, Francis voiced strong objections. In a letter addressed to American bishops, he condemned these actions as dehumanizing and warned that such programs would have dire consequences. Throughout his papacy, Francis had made the protection of migrants a core priority, often visiting refugee camps and calling on wealthier nations to share in the burden of care. As his health declined in early 2025, Pope Francis canceled numerous appearances, including his weekly Sunday prayers. He had become increasingly reliant on a wheelchair and faced the cumulative effects of age, past surgeries, and respiratory illness. His final hospitalization proved to be the last in a long series of health struggles. Over time, it became apparent that he would not recover, and preparations for his death quietly began behind the scenes. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who serves as the Vatican Camerlengo, the official responsible for managing the transition between popes, paid tribute to Francis in a heartfelt message. He praised the late pope's commitment to gospel values, especially his focus on supporting the marginalized. Francis's death, he said, marked the end of a chapter defined by universal love, courage, and spiritual fidelity. Even as the Pope's physical strength diminished, his voice on matters of global concern remained strong. In his last year, he continued to confront the Church's darkest legacy, sexual abuse. During a trip to Belgium in September 2024, he addressed a crowd of over 30,000 people and insisted that evil must be exposed, not hidden. His remarks followed a private meeting with abuse survivors. Over the years, Francis took numerous steps to acknowledge and confront this issue. In 2018, he directly urged perpetrators to confess and face divine justice. He also acknowledged that nuns had suffered abuse by priests and bishops, something rarely admitted by papal authorities. In 2020, following the release of a damning report on Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, Francis vowed to eradicate child abuse within the Church. His efforts included institutional reforms and public acknowledgments of past failures. Though many believed that more could have been done, few doubted his sincerity or the significance of his interventions. One enduring controversy from his past was his role during Argentina's military dictatorship in the 1970s. As the country's Jesuit leader at the time, he was accused of not doing enough to protect victims of the regime's brutal crackdown. Thousands of people were tortured, killed, or disappeared during what became known as the Dirty War. Some critics alleged that Francis even allowed 2 Jesuit priests under his care to be captured and tortured. Though he later testified in court and the bishops of Argentina issued an apology under his leadership, the issue continued to cast a shadow over his legacy. Still, many defenders insisted that Francis had acted discreetly to help victims and avoid further bloodshed. Some reports suggested he had intervened privately on behalf of the persecuted, including visiting the home of dictator Jorge Videla to plead for clemency. Whether his actions were sufficient or not, Francis weathered the storm and continued to emphasize reconciliation and transparency in his papal mission. Over the course of his papacy, Francis traveled extensively, engaging with diverse cultures and faiths. His first international visit was to Brazil, and he followed it with journeys to the Middle East, Cuba, the US, Ireland, and Iraq, among others. His 2021 visit to Iraq marked a historic moment as he became the first pope to visit the country, holding prayers for peace and unity among Christians and Muslims alike. In Israel, he visited sacred sites of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, underscoring his commitment to interfaith dialogue. Throughout his tenure, Pope Francis sought to reframe the image of the Church. He declined to live in the luxurious papal apartments, choosing instead a modest residence in the Vatican guest house. He was often photographed carrying his own bags, speaking directly with the poor, and shunning excessive ceremony. These gestures endeared him to many and symbolized a church more focused on humility and service than prestige. He also inspired cultural works, such as the novel Conclave by Robert Harris, which was directly influenced by the image of Francis being surrounded by cardinals on the day of his election. The book's adaptation into a feature film in 2024, starring Ralph Fiennes, received critical acclaim and went on to win several major awards, including Best Film at the BAFTAs. With his passing, the Catholic Church enters a solemn period of mourning and transition. While his final years were marked by physical decline, his spiritual and moral voice continued to resonate powerfully across the globe. Whether blessing the crowds in Rome, addressing geopolitical tensions, or grappling with the Church's internal crises, Francis remained deeply engaged until the very end. His legacy will likely be remembered as one of compassion, humility, and reform, not always universally accepted, but undeniably influential. As the world reflects on his life, his message of fraternity and justice endures, echoing beyond the confines of the Church and into the broader human family. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more updates on celebrity deaths and news updates.